So once the war is over, the dreary steeples re-emerge, as Churchill famously said. But it's a very different British polity that is now dealing with Ireland, and a very different government that is now dealing with Ireland than it was before the war.
Yes, and this again, this is where the Ulster Unionists were, well, they were shrewd, but they were also lucky, because as a result of the 1918 general election, although the coalition government remains in office, in fact, the Liberal Party is split, and there is an overall Conservative Party majority in the House of Commons. So at any time, from January 1919 onwards, the Tory party can pull the plug on Lloyd George, and they can put in whoever they want. And they put in Bonar Law as their Prime Minister, not until the end of 1922. So that means any Irish policy that the government adopts has to be an Irish policy which is acceptable to the Conservative Party, and that means, in effect, a policy which is acceptable to the Ulster Unionists.
Now, as you said earlier, in the aftermath of the World War, Lloyd George is concentrating on Versailles, he's concentrating on the big thing, which is the peace treaty, the peace conference, the peace treaty. Not so interested, probably, in what's going on in Ireland then.
Not at all. I mean, it's very much one-man government. The King, George V, complained about Lloyd George going to Paris. He says, you know, while you're away, nothing happens. Everything gets held up. Nothing happens. The cabinet very rarely met. Bonar Law would put on flying gear and fly over from London to Paris to talk to Lloyd George about anything that was important. But Lloyd George didn't really want to know. And it's also, from a personal point of view, it's a very happy time for Lloyd George, because he's with his mistress, his confidential secretary, Frances Stevenson, in Paris. And they've got much more liberty to be together than they would have in London. And it's widely recognised it was the happiest time of their relationship. So that's what he's thinking about. He's not thinking about Ireland.
And President Wilson wasn't thinking about Ireland either, despite the hopes, the somewhat unrealistic hopes that Sinn Féin and particularly De Valera had, that they could put pressure on Wilson to follow through on the 14 points and receive an Irish deputation in Versailles.
Well, I mean, if Woodrow Wilson had meant what he said about the 14 points, then the Irish would have been admitted to the Paris Peace Conference. But he ran smack up against, this was just something that Woodrow Wilson couldn't afford to fall out with Lloyd George, and this was a red line issue as far as Lloyd George was concerned. Lloyd George did agree, and he regretted it afterwards, to an American Commission of Inquiry coming to Ireland in 1919, and that produced all kinds of embarrassments for the British government. But the Irish were not going to get into the Paris Peace Conference, no.